Is it a living thing? Is it not? Today, we're going to be discussing living things and what features something needs to have in order to be called living. Most importantly, we're going to decide whether fire is a living thing or not, based on some simple experiments. So what is a living thing? In order for something to be living, it needs to have 9 properties that scientists have discovered that make it alive. These things are: does it have cells? Does it have DNA? Does it need water to live? Does it respond to a stimulus? Does it need energy? Does it reproduce? Can it grow? Does it breathe? And does it excrete? When you see fire, what do you think?
I think it's pretty, and I think that it burns.
Would you say that fire is alive?
Yeah.
Let's explore fire as a living organism based on these characteristics we've just said. Does fire need energy? All living things need to be able to consume some kind of food in order to survive. Some creatures can make it on their own, like plants through photosynthesis, whereas some depend on others to make food for them, like human beings. We have a little candle here to simulate our fire. So let's look at our candle. Tell me, can you see it eating anything, Emma?
I think that it's eating the wick, and it's slowly eating away at the wax around it as well.
That's correct. The candle fire is slowly consuming the wax and the wick, which is giving it the food that it needs in order to survive. Wildfires use all kinds of bushes, bark, shrubs, trees, dead grass to grow, kind of like our bush over here. All fires need a fuel source to be able to keep it burning, and without the fuel, the fire will die. Does it breathe? In order for something to be deemed as living, it needs to be able to breathe or respire, just like this. In other words, does it need oxygen in order to live? Let's do another experiment with our little candle. What do you think is going to happen when you place the glass over the top of the candle?
I don't know.
Let's test our theory. Do you place the glass over the candle? What happens to our fire?
It's gone out.
That's right. Fire needs oxygen, as fire is the result of a chemical reaction between oxygen and the material that it burns from. And in order to survive and grow, fire needs to be constantly fueled with oxygen. Without the oxygen, the reaction is not possible, and therefore the fire will die. Can fire move? In order to be deemed as living, fire needs to be able to move around. Now, there are 2 ways in which something can be deemed as moving. It can have a physical movement, kind of like this, like humans do, or it can be a more subtle movement like the way that plants grow. So, let's do another experiment with our candle. Can you see the fire moving at all, Emma?
Sort of.
What do you think is going to happen if you blow on the candle a little bit? Not too hard. What happened?
It's moving.
That's right. The fire is responding to the stimulus and is moving around because of the wind. In this way, it can be seen as moving. Does fire reproduce? Now, in order for something to be deemed as living, it needs to be able to reproduce or make babies. So, this can be done in a few different kinds of ways depending on what we're talking about. Do you think a fire can reproduce, Emma?
I don't really think so.
Well, it can be argued that fire in some ways is able to reproduce. If you have a look at our picture here, Emma, you can see that the fire comes from a very big bushfire, sends off little smokes and sparks that then come over to a whole new place and start a new fire. In this way, fire can be seen as reproducing. So, fire can reproduce. Does fire grow? Now, in order for something to be deemed as living again, it needs to be able to grow. Growing is a natural part of the life cycle of all living things, and as such, in order to be considered as living, we need to be able to grow in some way, shape or form. Now, do you think a fire grows, Emma?
Yes.
Let's do another experiment. Now remember, we've got to be very, very careful because this is fire and fire can be dangerous. So, what do you think is going to happen when I add some more fuel to our fire, Emma?
I don't know, Kobe. Let's find out.
Let's test it. happening here, Emma?
The fire is getting very large.
That's right, the fire is growing and growing and growing. So, we can see that our small little fire can grow into a very, very big fire just from small sparks. Therefore, fire is growing. Okay, Emma, does fire excrete? Now, excretion is the release of any excess waste that living creatures create. So, thinking of that, do you think our fire excretes in any way?
No.
It can be argued that fires excrete, Emma, because fires have smoke and ash. And smoke and ash can be considered an excretion from fire. So far, let's look at what we have discovered about fire. That means it could be a living thing. Now, fire needs air to breathe, it grows, it moves, it reproduces, it requires energy, and depending on who you ask, fire can excrete. So, remember, in order to be a living thing, any element needs to have all 9 of the properties that we discussed earlier. So let's keep on going. We're nearly to the end. We've got 3 more things to discuss. So, does fire have cells or DNA? What do you think, Emma?
I'm not sure, Kobe.
Now, in order to explain this a bit better, I'm going to show you a picture. Now, cells have nuclei, or nucleus in them, which also within the nucleus have chromosomes, and these chromosomes hold the DNA. So, in order for fire to have cells, it will also have DNA. Now, DNA is the basic building blocks of life, and without it, something cannot be considered living, because it does not have the DNA that it needs to be able to self-replicate and make copies of itself through a process known as mitosis. So, what do you think? Does fire have DNA or cells, Emma?
I don't think so.
We know that fire is made up of a mixture of CO2, water vapour, oxygen and nitrogen, and when all of these chemicals mix together, that causes a chemical reaction. That's when the flame is produced. And although we can look at fire and say that they all look the same, it is not in fact a replication of itself or a copy. It actually is the same thing that we're using to make the fire. That means it looks similar. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Does it need water? In order for something to be a living thing, it needs to consume water to be able to survive. So, what do you think is going to happen when we pour a glass of water onto a fire, Emma?
I think it's probably going to go out.
Let's give our theory a test. Do you want to pour the glass of water onto the fire? What happened?
It went out.
Definitely. As you can clearly see, when you put water onto a fire, the fire quickly dies out. This is because water is an excellent absorber of heat. So, in order to be considered living, fire needs to have all 9 of the key elements that we've discussed in order to be deemed as a living thing. Let's put up a tick or a cross as to whether or not we think that fire has those elements. Yeah?
Okay.
Okay, so, does fire have cells? No, fire does not have cells. Does it have DNA? No, fire does not have DNA. What about moving? Can fire move? Yes, fire definitely can move. Does it need energy to live? Yes, fire definitely needs energy to live. Can it reproduce? Yes, in some ways fire can reproduce. Can it grow? Definitely. That's why we get such big bushfires. Can it breathe? Yes, just like us, fire does breathe. Does it excrete? Yes, depending on who you ask. Fire can excrete in some ways. And lastly, does fire need water to live? No, fire definitely does not need water to live. So, based on this, do you think fire is alive, Emma?
No, I don't think fire is a living thing.
No, definitely not. Fire did not meet all 9 of our key elements and therefore it cannot be considered a living thing. So, today we have learnt fire is not a living thing. Thanks.